Chapter 38. Now in the meantime it came about that when Judah went down from his brothers, he pitched his tent near a man, an Adullamite, and his name was Hira. And there Judah got to see a daughter of a certain Canaanite, and his name was Shua. So he took her and had relations with her, and she became pregnant. Later she bore a son, and he called his name Again she became pregnant. In time she bore a son, and called his name Onan. Yet another time she went on to bear a son, and then called his name Shelah. Now he happened to be an Active at the time she bore him. In time Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, proved to be bad in the eyes of Jehovah. Hence Jehovah put him to death. In view of that, Judah said to Onan, "Have relations with your brother's wife, and perform brother-in-law marriage with her, and raise up offspring for your brother." But Onan knew that the offspring would not become his. And it occurred that when he did have relations with his brother's wife, he wasted his semen on the earth, so as not to give offspring to his brother. Now what he did was bad in the eyes of Jehovah. Hence he put him also to death. So Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, "Dwell as a widow in the house of your father until Shelah my son grows up." For he said to himself, "He too may die like his brothers." Accordingly Tamar went and continued to dwell at her own father's house. Thus the days became many, and the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died. And Judah kept the period of mourning. After that he went up to the shearers of his sheep, he and Hira his companion the Adullamite, to Timnah. Then it was told to Tamar, "Here, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep." With that, she removed the garments of her widowhood from her, and covered herself with a shawl, and veiled herself, and sat down at the entrance of Enaim, which is along the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah had grown up, and yet she had not been given as a wife to him. When Judah caught sight of her, he at once took her for a harlot, because she had covered her face. So he turned aside to her by the road and said, "Allow me, please, to have relations with you." For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. However, she said, "What will you give me that you may have relations with me?" To this he said, "I myself shall send a kid of the goats from the herd." But she said, "Will you give us security until you send it?" And he continued, "What is the security that I shall give you?" To which she said, "Your seal ring and your cord and your rod that is in your hand." Then he gave them to her, and had relations with her, so that she became pregnant by him. After that she got up, and went and removed her shawl off her, and clothed herself with the garments of her widowhood. And Judah proceeded to send the kid of the goats by the hand of his companion, the Adullamite, in order to get back the security from the hand of the woman, but he never found her. And he went inquiring of the men of her place, saying, "Where is that temple prostitute in Enaim along the road?" But they kept saying, "No temple prostitute has ever been in this place." Finally he returned to Judah and said, "I never found her, and besides, the men of the place said, 'No temple prostitute has ever been in this place.'" So Judah said, "Let her take them for herself, in order that we may not fall into contempt. At any rate, I have sent this kid, but you never found her." However, about 3 months later it happened that it was told to Judah, "Tamar your daughter-in-law has played the harlot, and here she is also pregnant by her harlotry." At that Judah said, "Bring her out, and let her be burned." As she was being brought out, she herself sent to her father-in-law, saying, "By the man to whom these belong I am pregnant." And she added, "Examine, please, to whom these belong, the seal ring and the cord and the rod." Then Judah examined them and said, "She is more righteous than I am, for the reason that I did not give her to Shelah my son." And he had no further intercourse with her after that. Now it developed that in the time of her giving birth, here there were twins in her belly. Further, it turned out that when she was giving birth, one extended his hand, and the midwife at once took and tied a scarlet piece about his hand, saying, "This one came out first." Finally it developed that as soon as he drew back his hand, why, here his brother came out, so that she exclaimed, "What do you mean by this, that you have produced a perineal rupture for yourself?" Hence his name was called Perez. And afterward his brother, upon whose hand the scarlet piece was, came out, and his name came to be called Zerah. Chapter 39. As for Joseph, he was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, a court official of Pharaoh, the chief of the bodyguard, an Egyptian, got to buy him from the hand of the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. But Jehovah proved to be with Joseph, so that he turned out a successful man and came to be over the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master got to see that Jehovah was with him, and that everything he was doing, Jehovah was making turn out successful in his hand. And Joseph kept finding favor in his eyes, and waited upon him continually, so that he appointed him over his house, and all that was his he gave into his hand. And it followed that from the time he appointed him over his house, and in charge of all that was his, Jehovah kept blessing the house of the Egyptian due to Joseph, and Jehovah's blessing came to be upon all that he had in the house and in the field. Finally he left everything that was his in Joseph's hand, and he did not know what was with him at all except the bread he was eating. Moreover, Joseph grew to be beautiful in form and beautiful in appearance. Now after these things, it came about that the wife of his master began to raise her eyes toward Joseph and say, "Lie down with me." But he would refuse and would say to his master's wife, "Here my master does not know what is with me in the house, and everything he has given into my hand. There is no one greater in this house than I am, and he has not withheld from me anything at all, except you, because you are his wife. So how could I commit this great badness, and actually sin against God?" So it turned out that as she spoke to Joseph day after day, he never listened to her to lie alongside her, to continue with her. But it happened that on this day as other days, he went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there in the house. Then she grabbed hold of him by his garment, saying, "Lie down with me." But he left his garment in her hand, and took to flight, and went on outside. So it occurred that as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand, that he might flee outside, she began to cry out to the men of her house, and to say to them, "Look, he brought to us a man, a Hebrew, to make us a laughingstock. He came to me to lie down with me, but I began to cry out at the top of my voice, and it followed that as soon as he heard that I raised my voice and began crying out, he then left his garment beside me and took to flight, and went on outside." After that she kept his garment laid up beside her, until his master came to his house. Then she spoke to him according to these words, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you brought to us came to me to make me a laughingstock. But it followed that as soon as I raised my voice and began to cry out, he then left his garment beside me and went fleeing outside." The result was that as soon as his master heard the words of his wife, which she spoke to him, saying, "Like this and this your servant did to me," his anger blazed. So Joseph's master took him and gave him over to the prison house, the place where the prisoners of the king were kept under arrest, and he continued there in the prison house. However, Jehovah continued with Joseph, and kept extending loving kindness to him, and granting him to find favor in the eyes of the chief officer of the prison house. So the chief officer of the prison house gave over into Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison house, and everything that they were doing there, he proved to be the one having it done. The chief officer of the prison house was looking after absolutely nothing that was in his hand, because Jehovah was with Joseph, and what he was doing, Jehovah was making it turn out successful.